Hello, friends, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope I'm clear to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. So, I welcome you all for another wonderful and edifying session on the series of Inspiring Young Leaders. I'm Professor Rajni from Sri Balaji University, Pune. I'm playing role as a moderator for today's session, which is based on design thinking to enhance research outcomes. Before we get more insight on this topic, let me just brief you regarding description on design thinking. So design thinking is a problem-solving approach that empathizes empathy, collaboration, experimentation, and creativity to solve complex problems. It has become increasingly popular in many fields, including research, as a way to improve outcomes and generate new ideas. In research, design thinking can help researchers to gain a deeper understanding of the needs and experiences of their target audience or users, which can lead to more innovative and effective solutions. By applying design thinking approach, researchers can also encourage collaboration and experimentation, which can help to generate new and innovative acumen. Design thinking can be applied to a wide range of problems, from designing new products and services to developing marketing campaigns and improving workplace environment. It is often being utilized in industries such as technology, healthcare, and education, where there is a need to promote solutions that meet the requirement of users. Now, let's get further insights on this topic from today's speaker. So, friends, today we have between us an expert and eminent speaker, Dr. Rajeshwari Patil. Before we start the session, let me share her illustrious career. The concept of talent transformation and enrichment has always fascinated her, and thus career in academic field was always a logical choice for Dr. Patil ma'am. A short stint in merit track in the field of skill assessment, recruitment, and training gave her the much required insight into the human resource discipline and helped Dr. Rajeshwari ma'am to finalize the stream to pursue higher education. Moving further, on her professional pursuits, she has completed her PhD from Bharati Vidyapeeth University, Pune, cleared NET for lecturership in December 2008. Dr. Rajeshwari ma'am has NPTEL certification in design thinking and qualitative research and research writing, as well an online certification in people analytics from Wharton University of Pennsylvania. I'd also like to share her research work. Dr. Rajeshwari has published many papers in Scopus Index Journal with high impact factor of 16, and recently one paper on design thinking, a creative approach to develop an employee experience scale. She has presented more than 10 papers in national and international conferences. Along with that, ma'am has also attended many FTP. Name a few. Presented a demographic dividend vis-a-vis skill gap in India at an international conference hosted by Bharati Vidyapeeth University. Presented employee engagement and development for digital generation at a national conference hosted by D.Y. Patil University. The paper was adjudicated as the best paper in human resource category by industry leaders and academicians. And it was also selected among the top 2 papers in human resource. She has also presented a paper on leveraging human capital through nearshoring, India and Mexico at an international conference hosted by ASM. Another paper on how will social media change the theories and concept in SEM and emerging technologies. Apart from academics, she has also corporate experience too in few companies like Merit Track, FlexiOne, MW Financial Services. She has handled some of the projects in Tata Motors and SHCIL. Currently, ma'am is designated as Deputy Director in Sri Balaji University, Pune. So friends, before I hand over the session to our speaker, I wish to enrich my audience with few general instructions. Participants cannot be able to unmute themselves, and if they have any question, they can put it in Zoom chat box and that will be taken in the Q&A session. Feedback link will be shared in the Q&A session and it is available only for 15 minutes. And the last is the e-certificate will be provided only to those participants who will fill the feedback after the session. So I request all the participants to please follow the instruction for the smooth flow of the session. So now I request Rajeshwari ma'am to take over the session. Rajeshwari ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, friends. So the topic that we are going to discuss today is about design thinking, specifically focusing on how it can enhance the research outcomes. All right. So what we'll be covering in this next 40 or 45 minutes is just three of our agendas. Is we'll look at what is design thinking. We'll follow it up with understanding is why is it important, and then we'll discuss how design thinking can enhance our research outcomes. So to start with, I'm sure you must have heard about this very famous saying that Albert Einstein gave us. It says that problems that exist today cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that actually created them. Now, this fits in well in today's world. If you look at around your own cell, you'll find that our problems are very multidimensional, they're very interrelated, they're very complex, plus they are very ambiguous. Right? So when you're trying to build up a solution or when you're trying to find a solution for them, you have to look at it from an entire perspective, identify what factors are creating those problems, because there's always a cause and effect relationship that has been seen between each of these factors that are aligned to the bigger problem. Now, this is also something which is also called as the wicked problem. So design thinking has been one of those approaches which has proven results in solving many such wicked problems. So a few examples when we look at what wicked problems could be is, the first and the very most wicked problem that the entire world is facing is the global warming. If you talk about poverty, that also is one of the wicked problems. If you talk about the kind of illiteracy that we are facing today, that is also another example of wicked problems. So if we are trying, why do we call them these as wicked problems? And if we are trying to solve them, what is the major issue? So if you're taking an example of global warming, it's difficult for us to identify where is the root cause or where is the starting point from. So if you just ask anybody around you and say, why is it hot these days? We would say that the ozone layer is depleting, or we would say that there has been very scanty rainfalls. The entire pattern of our seasons is changing. We could also say the causes for this is probably because we have been cutting down a lot of the trees around us. Right? But at the same time, we are also looking at modernization. We want the industries to grow. We want to make more space for urban housing. So it's all interrelated. So these are the wicked problems which are very confusing, which are very interrelated, and you cannot find a solution for it unless you understand and pinpoint one of those factors from where you can start. So by the time we're dealing with growing more trees, and at the same time, you have another set of people or another set of stakeholders who are trying to build in big roads, construct more of metros, they're the ones who are forced to cut down the trees. So what is the solution that will take care of all these smaller problems, plus it's going to be in the interest of all your stakeholders, the society, the people, you have your industry. So how do you take care? So this is where you need a new approach. You need a very scientific proven approach, and design thinking is that one solution. So let's now talk about what exactly is design thinking. Now, design thinking, if you say, is being a concept, it's not a very recent concept. This concept has been there since ages, but it was more predominantly in the design industry, probably architecture, or when you want to construct something which requires a lot of aesthetics. So that is where this concept has already been there for years. Design thinking recently has been you can call it as brought in by limelight because of IDEO, which is a design thinking company, and then the Stanford Design School, which brought up this concept and explained it in detail, saying that this same concept would be used to solve any kind of problems that we are facing today. In fact, design thinking is so interesting that if you understand the mindsets, if you learn those skills, you could also solve your day-to-day problems. Right? So a few definitions that I've put up here on the screen for discussion is that design thinking, it's a discipline that uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people needs. With that, what is technically feasible and what is viable for business strategies and can be converted into customer value and market opportunity. So this approach, if you see, focuses on everything. It focuses on your designer's skills. It focuses on match and identify what are the people needs. What is it that your user, what is it that your customer requires? Plus, it also looks at the three important aspects. One, whatever solution you design, is it desirable? Is it user-friendly? Is it something that your customer and your user needs? Second, do you have the technological feasibility to design it and then launch it on a larger platform? And the third and the most important that comes from the point of view of any organization or a company is your solution viable as well? So what design thinking does is it brings in all these three aspects together. And what comes out when you look at these three things, that's people, technology, as well as business requirements, and that's a business outcomes, you have innovation. Right? Now, another aspect, you'll have another set of people who have the old school thought that says innovation is something that requires skills. And these skills are not easily available, or it's not easy, it does not come naturally to people. Now, here's this entire discipline, this design thinking discipline, which is now proving that the skills required for innovation is a myth. Design thinking as an approach could help you develop those mindsets. It will also help you develop those skills, which are very important to innovate. So if you learn these skills, in other words, we say innovation is possible for everybody. Plus, design thinking, the second definition. So I'll just talk about the second definition for a minute. So design thinking is a human-centered approach. So right from the stage one to the end stage, the focus has always been on the people, on the user, right? And to an innovation that draws from a designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, possibility of the technology, and the requirements of the business success, right? So the same thing comes back again, that it is only about people. Now, why design thinking has become so popular is because there has been a transition in the industrial era as well. Earlier, a product was innovated and the product was sold to the user. There has been a turnaround that you will see currently in your business environment, that companies are now focusing to produce and innovate only that what the user needs. So the user is now in the center, right? So that's how design thinking helps. So again, design thinking is a human-centric approach. It's iterative, innovative problem-solving technique. So this brings us to understanding what is this design thinking process that we have been talking. When we are looking at a solution that is more innovative and a solution that is more feasible for the organization, right? So design thinking is basically a 5-stage process. Now, what every organization or there are a lot of companies and there are a lot of consulting firms who have given different sets of processes. So one of the most easiest one is the 5-stage process, which is empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Right? So currently, if you see, there's another addition that's happened to this 5 phase, which is implementation. Now, what is empathy? Right? Now, we all know what is empathy. It's very simple. You understand the user by stepping into his shoes. Right? So empathy basically looks at and focuses more on the user. So the focus is completely into what the user needs. What is it that is his pains and his gains? and how do you understand that you understand the user in totality, right? So here when we're talking about and aligning it to our research process, design thinking stage where we're talking about empathy, we're also talking in terms of research as research your user's needs, or it is basically talking about what is it that the user needs, right? So that's where the empathy part is. Then you have a define stage. Now, in the define stage, it is about identifying the problem that needs a solution. So you, in the empathy stage, you learn about the user, you understand what are his problems, you understand what are his pains, what are his gains, why does he need a particular product, right? Now, a little more on empathy is, typically what happens is, if there are a lot of latent needs, those needs which are not very easily understood by the user himself, right? It's like you have the iPhone, right? And nobody really knew or spoke about what are the features and how helpful they would be unless we started using the product, right? Then you also had cameras, you had Kodak, right? So cameras and Kodak reels were normally used for photography. Now, Kodak has moved out of the business completely, and what you have is you have your own cell phones, and you take pictures using your cell phones. So you have one compact product, which is not only about talking and speaking to friends or capturing pictures or memories. We are also using a lot of other apps on our cell phone, right? So how do you understand these? You understand these is only when you're closer to your user and you're trying to focus and understand what are his needs and what are his pain points. Once that is understood, the next stage it's about define. Now here in define, with whatever information that you got from your empathy stage, we would be using the same insights to understand and define our problem statement, right? So in the define stage, you might identify that there are multiple problems. But what design thinking focuses is that you focus only on those problems which are very important, which could be human-centric, which are innovative, and which could be technically and business viable, right? So you, instead of looking at everything at a time, design thinking gives you an approach wherein you can start focusing on problems which need urgent attention. Then once you've done you've defined your problem, you then move on to the ideation stage. Now here in ideation stage, the basic of this is that you're challenging your assumptions and creating new ideas. What we already have with us is insights from the users. We have a very clear defined problem statements. Now the team comes together. So design thinking is more about a collaborative approach. So the team comes together, and this team then starts working on designing solutions. So it's not just one person who's coming up with the solution, it's a team that comes together. So you use tools like brainstorming, mind mapping, you're challenging your ideas, right? And you're also challenging certain assumptions that we normally have, or in the traditional research process, we start with an assumption. We build a hypothesis, and then we start working around those assumptions. So what design thinking does is it puts you in the user state, makes you understand them, helps you define your problem, and then around those insights that you've got, we start ideating, you start discussing. Once your ideas are ready, right, the next logical step is to create prototypes. Now, the minute you hear this word prototypes, I'm sure you might have a vision which is about a car. So you might have seen some Hyundai car or maybe a Volkswagen or even a Tata Motors, which creates their prototypes of an entire product, right? But prototypes are not necessarily you have to create a whole product and then put it for testing. What design thinking says is create prototypes at every stage. Create smaller prototypes which are low fidelity, right? Test them. and test them as quick as possible so that you know what changes has to be made. Now, these prototypes can be of anything. It could be sketches. It could also be a small a canvas. It could also be a simple presentation, right? Which talks about how a particular solution or how a particular product will solve the pain points that you were identified in the empathy stage, right? So again, when you see at the prototype level also, our focus is again on the user. We're again going back to empathy stage. We're drawing a lot of insights from the empathy stage, even at a ideation stage as well as the prototype stage. Right? And the other important idea of design thinking is that it's always better to fail earlier. So when I'm creating small prototypes of my larger solution and testing it, it's always appreciated, or you can say it's always better to fail quickly, because it's from that when you learn and you can re-refine or you can redefine your problem statement, right? Rather than creating a huge product, investing a lot of amount in it, putting it to test, and then realizing that the product doesn't work or the product doesn't solve the problems that you've identified at the empathy stage, right? So that's what prototype talks about. So in the earlier stage, it's always suitable to have smaller prototypes of every design stage. And towards the end, when you've done all your refining, right, empathizing, you could then create a high fidelity product, which is a complete product by itself. So here what you're doing is you are controlling your process at every stage. Right? And then finally, you put in to test your solutions. Now here what you need to understand here in this entire process is that while you're testing, it's important that you test it with multiple techniques, right? You go back with the product and hand it over to, say, the user, preferably the ones that you've already met at your empathy stage, and get their insights. Understand how do they handle those products, right? So in test, you don't have to give them a questionnaire, right? Give them the product itself, let them handle the product. As a designer, our job is to do the observation part of it, immerse in the situation itself, right? And then identify what are the emotions that people have. What are they able to handle the product with? Do they need or support help, or they need any sort of support or help to use the product, right? So when you're doing that at the test level, you're also understanding with whatever product you have or whatever solution you've designed, is it making the life easier for your user, or is it making it all the more complex? Because your solution is designed in a way that it takes care of all the pain points, or you can say frustrations that have been looked at, that you have understood at the empathy stage. Right? Once you have a clear idea that if this solution works, then is when you could probably go and launch it full scale. And that's how you have implement as the next stage that most of the companies or most of the consulting firms are now proposing. Right? So this is the design thinking process. Empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Right? So I just put this entire process, I told you what the process is. Now let's look at it from an example. Now suppose you walk into an hospital, right? And you walk into an emergency ward, and you find a lot of people sitting there, waiting for their doctors, maybe waiting for the nurse, also waiting for somebody to come and take the case details. Can design thinking process be used in such situation? It definitely can be used. So what is the objective, right? Why do you want to apply this design thinking process in this case? Now here in this case, the outcome needs to be identified right from the beginning. So let's take for example that the outcome is to improve the experience of your patients and their relatives who are waiting in the waiting room. So what do? You start with an empathy stage. At the empathy stage, what the designer teams normally do is they observe every patient and the say family members who are friends who have come uh, to the waiting room, right? You interview them, talk to them, right? Get insights as to what is their feelings, okay? What are their emotions? Are they frustrated? Are they tensed? Okay, what is it that they need quickly? So when you get all of this, you can then identify what needs to be reach aligned, what processes needs to be changed. Is it the process of registering important? Is it the process of visiting the doctor quickly? Do you need to reduce the waiting time in the this? Do you also make sure that your lobbies or the waiting hall is made very comfortable and they have a good experience while the entire process gets through? Okay? So this is what you identify. So you can identify 3, 4 problems at the same time. Then the team can sit together and start deciding what needs to be done. Okay. Prototype again, design your solution, test it with your users in the hospital. And once you find that now you do a feedback, you do a customer satisfaction survey, or you do a customer experience survey, and you realize that it has given you good outcomes. So you're very close to your initial outcomes that you have decided. Right? So then what happens is you launch it on a larger scale. Now, this example that I just gave you about is something that companies and industries are using today. Right? Some example is Narayan Health, right? You have Max hospitals are using. KV is another hospital that's using design thinking to improve the experience. Apollo, another example which is using design thinking to increase the customer experience. They you have if you look at Narayan or if you look at Apollo, at some of their hospitals they've created an entire journey map, right? Identifying important touch points. So you have right from the time that you enter the hospital, who are you supposed to get in touch with, name of the person, the contact number, and the designated area where you meet that person. Then you move on to the process. You have another person's name as well as his designation and the designated area where the patient can go. Now, in the beginning itself, when you have a huge wall filled with this integrate data, right, this detailed information, it makes the experience of your patients and their family members pleasurable. So you're taking away those pains at a larger extent. Right? So here's another example. Now we've spoken about an example from an healthcare. Design thinking has also been successful in handling a lot of social issues. And one such example is the life-saving dot. Okay. Now, what is the problem that that we face in India is about the iodine deficiency. Right? Now, iodine deficiency, as we all are aware, impacts about 2 billion people worldwide. And these deficiencies are then having a lot of effect on other problems. Like you have a brain damage, it could be breast cancer, it could be pregnancy complications, and many more. Right? What is the traditional solution? Include seafood in your diet. Right? Have a very healthy diet. Use iodized salt. Now, traditionally, these are the solutions that you have for iodine deficiency, or it could be an iodine supplement. But a problem that was identified by Neil Vasant Medical Foundation and Research Center was that in India, this has been a real threat, and specifically in hilly regions and those in the rural areas. And why so? One, mostly because India as a nation, you have a lot of residents who are vegetarians. So the solution of seafood is already out. Okay. Second, the soil that India has is not very rich in this mineral. Right? Now, this combination that you have, and especially with the rural areas, have been a major cause for iodine deficiency and the diseases and the health reasons. So the innovative solution that Gray Group in Singapore, along with Nielsen Medical Foundation and Research came up with was they use the design thinking process. They empathize with the rural India. Right? They looked at what is the life of the rural Indian women. Right? How do they spend their day in and their day out? All right. Now, one typical thing that we are all aware of is that Indian women wear the bindi. Right? Now, how do you make sure that can that be a solution to this entire problem if they're not having, say, seafood, or they're not able to take in iodized salt or even the supplement? So they came up with a bindi which was infused with the iodine drops. Now, this little product, okay, is something that has been used by all Indian women who wear a bindi, and the research has also shown that iodine is also absorbed through our skin. So when you apply it on the forehead, iodine gets absorbed. Now, this solution is user desirable, right? We're not going to refuse wearing a bindi, especially the rural areas. Second, what we have is that the minimum amount of iodine that needs to be is that the body needs is through it has been observed. Third, it is technically feasible. Plus, it is also business viable. The cost of these packets of bindi is not very high. So it's again a process, a solution, a design thinking solution that is just not for industries. It's just not for architectures. It's just not for designers. It's also to solve a lot of social issues as well. Now, understanding what design thinking is, let's look at it. Why has it been so important? So what we have is why companies are using. So you can look at the screen here. You'll see that these are major companies who have been using design thinking for a decade now. You've all heard about Airbnb, Google, Uber Eats, Apple, IBM, Amazon, Nike. We also have a lot of Indian companies, like you have Titan, you have Tata's, right? You have Honda, Activa. All these companies have been using design thinking for a long time. Reasons being your 6 important business outcomes, right? Innovation, improved customer experience, competitive advantage, right? And especially in an business environment where competition is so rigorous that you will see a transition of these competition very frequently. Cost reduction, increased revenue, as well as improved employee engagement. So design thinking takes care of all of these and many more. I'm just putting 6 here, and many more outcomes. Now let's talk about the most important agenda that we had is how design thinking enhances your research outcomes. Okay, so the last part of it. So if you look at what is research, so if you look at research, I'll put it in 3 Ds, right? And these 3 Ds are you define, okay, you design, and then you deliver. So you define your research question, you design your research objectives, and your research hypothesis. Design is about designing your research design. How do you want to go about collecting the data? How do you want to analyze the data? And how do you want to interpret the data? And the third important D is the delivery. Now, this is where is the most important part of it. So when we look at, traditionally, when you look at research, the entire focus is on the first 2 Ds. That is, define the problem, define your objectives, okay, and define your hypothesis. And then you start focusing on only designing research. What about the third D, which is very important? Now, this third D is delivering a solution, creating and delivering solution which can touch human lives, which can solve user problems. Right? So when you look at this, and then you look at your DT process, the design thinking process, we're looking at empathy, we're looking at define, ideate, prototype, and test. All right. So now how do you bring this together? How do you bring these 2 important processes together? So when you're defining your problem statement, all right, or when you're identifying your research question and research process, The normal traditional process is that you have an idea in mind, you've made up an assumption based on our thorough reading that we do through literature review, or we have spoken to someone and you've identified a problem. What you could do using design thinking is bring in the empathy element. You identify who your core user is, your core respondent is. So there is where our process of research should begin. So we have a lot of research methods which could be used. You could always start with an observation. Observe the person around you, right? Interview the person, right? Talk to people around you. Identify what is it that makes their life maybe miserable or problematic and needs a solution, right? So that's the second research process that we have. That's the interviews. Once we do this, we can do these interviews for say around 5 or 6 people or till the saturation level is reached. Once you get all the interview insights or you get your observation insights, the next step that has to be done is understand what is the trend. So we identify the common trend, and then based on that, you have to decide and define what is the problem that needs to be addressed. Right? So that is how we can arrive at our research objectives and our research questions. So empathy is something that comes in our stage with define. So it gets mingled up together, mixes up together. Then when we're talking about define, again, it becomes a part of our define. In the design part, right? Now what we normally do is you have two approaches. You go in for an observation and do a qualitative approach, or you look at an hypothesis, you build a hypothesis, and then you do a quantitative approach. You use a quantitative way of doing it. You develop a questionnaire. Now, what we can do using design thinking is a mix of both. Use the mix approach. So you're using your qualitative methods in the first stage, in the define part, you're empathizing. You come up with a common trend, then use the questionnaire to validate with a larger population. Okay. Then comes define. So in this, you have ideation, you have define that becomes a part of it. So when the time you start designing, ideation, which is brainstorming, it could be about creating mocks and using the prototypes at an early stage to understand whether your solution is feasible. Test it, whether your solution is something that matches the requirement of your identified respondents. And finally, deliver something that becomes an important aspect of the 3Ds. That's define, design, and deliver business outcomes. Okay. So here, if you look at this slide, what we have is, this slide gives you an idea of how research is, what design thinking is. In the last column, we talk about what tools and mindsets of design thinking could enhance your research outcomes. So when I'm talking about define and bringing in empathy and define together, what are the tools that I can have? I already spoke about observation and interviews, which is a part of our own research process. Design thinking gives you empathy maps. Right? Now, this empathy maps are basically a tool that gives you an idea of what the person is thinking. So it has a 4-quadrant. Design thinking empathy maps is basically a template that guides you through the 4 quadrants. So you have what they think, right? So what are they thinking about a product or a need? Then you have feel, right? Feeling is what is the person's feeling, emotions about it, what they hear, okay, from say the influences on say social media, or they hear from their surrounding people. So what they hear, and you also have is what they say. So think, feel, hear, and say are the 4 quadrants of an empathy map. Now, if you design a set of questions and you do your observation based on these 4 points of what your customers are thinking, what are they feeling, what are they saying, and moreover, what are they hearing, you have captured valuable insights which could be used in your defined stage. Right? So that's a design thinking tool which will help us in research. There are the other tools which are about define our problem statements. So all of us as researchers, we're pretty much sure how to define problem statements. Another interesting and my favorite is persona. Right? So like I told you on the earlier slide, that I'm going to observe a couple of people, maybe 5, 6. I'm going to interview another 5 and 6. But as researcher, we're very much interested in knowing what a larger population says. So when you create a questionnaire based on the empathy maps, you could circulate this questionnaire among a larger population. And that is where we will then start creating personas. So what are personas? These are fictional characters. These are, you could have a set of people who have common motivations, they have common needs, right? And they have common interests and say common pains that they want to solve. So all of these people who've given you similar kinds of insights through your questionnaire becomes one persona for me, right? Similarly, you can identify 2 or 3 personas. Now, why this is important? First, it tells you, your research data will tell you that I don't have similar problems that everybody is facing. I have people with different problems. So I'm clubbing these people with different problems together, keeping in mind that they need a separate solution to their problems, right? So that's how you then get categories of personas, which you then can address and get a solution that solves each of their problems. Now, the important part in persona is we're calling it as a fictitious character, but we will also name it. The reason why we name it is because design thinking depends and promotes empathizing heavily. The minute I say it is fictitious, my empathy drops. So what I do is I give it an age, I will give it a name, I will give it an occupation, which is again data that's driven from your questionnaire itself. I will also give it, say, work experience. I will also give it designation. Right? So you're creating a person. So that's how you are now putting your data into a proper format of maybe 1 or 2 personas. This helps us design a solution or ideate based on different solutions. So I might have more than 1 prototypes rather than just focusing on one solution and expecting it to fit everyone. Okay, so that's what design thinking helps. You also have stakeholder mapping as another tool. You also have customer experience mapping. There's customer life cycle mapping. All of these tools will help you define your problem statements and will give you good insights. Then comes my second D, which is design. Now, in the design, the design thinking process will include ideate, prototype, and test. What are the tools that are available to me? 1, brainstorming, very common to us. We all know about it. We also have prototypes, okay? Low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. Again, like I told you earlier, you could use sketches, paper prototypes, posters. So even when we're doing a workshop on design thinking, we have been using Legos, a very common game that our kids play, and they create a new infrastructure, maybe a new architect of the Lego pieces. So Legos also can be used. What's more important is the third part, that's test. Feedback, survey tools, A/B testing tools. Feedbacks, all of us know, let them handle the prototype and you take a feedback verbally from them, or you give them, let them handle the solution, the prototype, you give them a questionnaire. What we have again is A/B testing tools. Now, why this is important is because again, one of the important pillars of design thinking is that you try and, if you're going to fail early. So you're creating prototypes, multiple prototypes of the same solution. So you give your user an option to choose one of these. So you give them the first one, take a feedback on how they could use the product, give them the second prototype, and get to know them how they have used the second prototype. Now, this tool app is the most beneficial one because it gives you a clear idea of which of the two is better. 1. Second, we would end up having insights which are talking about specific features of the prototype A and specific features of prototype B, which could then be merged as the final product. So that's where we are now improving on our research outcomes. Finally, we've come to the deliver of business outcomes. So your business outcomes, as we saw in our earlier slides, could be innovation, could be customer experience and satisfaction, it could be your employee satisfaction, or it could be anything that you have started your project, right? So now once you do this, what you have in hand is a solution which you have co-created. So design thinking basically also talks about co-creation. And when we say co-creation, we're talking about involving our user or our respondent at every stage, right? So it's like you have not created it in the labs, you've created it in the field with your actual users. That's how it becomes human-centric. It's innovative, right? It's collaborative, and it is iterative. Iterative is that you move from one phase to another phase. So you keep moving. It doesn't happen like a traditional research, which is a very linear process. You finish 1, 2, 3, you might not go back to the earlier stage. But design thinking, you keep moving between the stages frequently till you have a solution. And a solution that, believe me, is something that's going to solve human problems. So with our solution and having design thinking coming to our research process, we are actually solving human solutions and we're making life better. Right? So this is how you could use design thinking tools to enhance our research outcomes. So with this, since we've touched upon all the 3 agendas which we started with. So I'll just quickly summarize what we looked at. So the outcome of design thinking and research can result in a product and service that are more user-centered, innovative, and meet the needs of the market. Okay? It can also lead to cost reduction and increased collaboration across departments, resulting in a culture of innovation and creativity. And ultimately, the outcome of design thinking and research is a better final product or service that meets the user and provides the needs of the user and provides a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Right? So that brings us to the end. So we're open for questions now. So can I stop? I'll stop sharing my screen and I'm open to take the questions.
Yes, ma'am. So I can see a couple of questions. So very engrossing and engaging session, ma'am, on design thinking to enhance research outcome. So a couple of questions already from the audience. So first question is that how can empathy-based research methods such as user interviews and observation be utilized in design thinking to gain insight into the user needs? Ma'am, your input on this.
Yeah. So like we started with when we spoke about the process of research, we focused more on empathy, right? So when you bring in the element of empathy in your research, right, you need to be immersive. So, when we're talking about business outcomes, we're talking about applied research. But the beginning part always has to be immersive. It has to be, you have to be a part of the situation, more of an ethnographic research, right? So we know quantitative method, ethnographic research. So when you immerse yourself and you empathize with you're actually you're playing the role of the user himself. So when you do that, you get a lot of insights. And through observations, you will identify those specific things which probably when you do an interview, your researcher might be very, very cautious. Your employee will be very cautious in giving you those insights. Right? So those are what you could collect from observations. So interview does help, but it has to go parallel. It has to be interview. It has to be your observation as well. So that's how it will then help you.
Okay, ma'am. So one more interesting question, ma'am. Question is, how can prototyping and iterative design be applied to research process to test and refine ideas?
Okay. Now, this is again something that I feel that we as Indians fail to publish our papers. Now, what we do is we start with the entire process. We take it through the solution, and there is where we stop, right? But what is required is that you also give a proof, or you also give a reason why your solution is worth considering. Does your solution give you that implication? It could be social or managerial, whichever, depending upon what your project is, right? So it can be both. Now, when I want to convince my audience and the international audience, and specifically when you're doing it for a company which is a sponsored project, they are more interested in knowing whether their solution is technically and financially viable. So if you do your prototypes and you keep testing it at every level of your research process, you'll identify flaws and you'll rectify them with the help of the user itself. Because it's the user who's going to give you an input during the process itself that it doesn't solve my problem. So if that is what is taken care of, we will be able to come up with solutions which will be technical and financial feasible. So you just cannot create something because the user wants. Okay. We'll also have to look at the other two angles, whether it is possible for the company to develop it at a larger scale, market it at a larger scale, and can they do it faster? That's how it gets connected to competitive advantage. You have to be the leader in the sector and wherever you are. That's how it gets connected.
Fine, ma'am. So one more question. One question is that give some reasons why design thinking fails.
Yeah, this is a very common question. Why design thinking fails? Now, a very common and a simple answer, a two-word answer is resistance to change. Okay. We've been using our traditional research in and out. Right? Now, if I want to bring in design thinking as a process and make sure that it succeeds, there are a couple of things that have to be taken care of. Right? It has to start from the top. It has to be a top to bottom approach. You need to understand that it's a culture. It's a mindset, right? It's not a one person's process like a researcher can do, because we have been talking about it to be a team. We've been talking about brainstorming. We're talking about collaboration and co-creation. So when you want to do something on this scale, your management also has to accept it as a culture. So when they accept it as a culture and put it into the mindsets of your design team or say your employees, the chances of it taking up is quick. Second important reason is we are underestimating the capability of prototyping. The example could be if you've used or heard about the notebook that Samsung came. Now without prototyping it to the fullest, they launched the market internationally. They launched it in the market. The batteries exploded and the phones had started. They caught fire. Correct. They did that because they had their agendas and they wanted to do it before another company could launch their iPads. So they wanted to capture market. What they failed was prototyping and testing. Had they put in a little more time in doing this, they would have identified reasons as to why was the notebook catching fire or exploding. That's the importance of prototyping and iterating, obviously, because you want to co-create something, you have to take your user along with you.
Okay, very nice. So I think we have 6 minutes more and we can take couple of two more questions we can take because it is already there in the chat box. So one question is there, as design thinking is a systematic process, then how it allow to skip any stage to move another?
Can you please repeat?
So as design thinking is a systematic process, then how it allows to skip any stage to move another?
See, it's a systematic process, but we're also saying design thinking is iterative. Now, what I mean by saying iterative is that there's no restriction that you follow empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. What you can do is you've empathized, while you're empathizing and talking to your users, you will always have ideas of coming to your mind when you're talking to them. Your user itself is giving you clues as how that problem can be solved. Now, a designer or a research expert needs to identify that quickly, right? So you get to know that. So you could directly go to an ideation stage while simultaneously you're defining the problem. Okay. And then once you create your solution, again, you're going to go back to your user by taking the prototype to them. So you're coming back to the first stage again. You're seeing now the product that you've given them to use, does it solve the problem? Does it match their expectations? Now, if it does so, you're on track. But if it does not, and the user rejects, they're already giving you a hint that it's going to fail. So you move through the entire process as and when required. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. But last question for today's session, ma'am. So please mention some of the common barriers to implementing design thinking in research and how can we overcome them? Okay. We are running out of time, so if we can...
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. A couple of them, like I told you, is the myth.
Yeah.
The myth that innovation, ideation, and solution is only for innovators. It's our mindset, right? If you start reading more and if you start using these tools, you'll realize that anybody can do it. Anybody can come up with solutions. Second, it is also said that design thinking requires a lot of budget. It does require, but then it's the choice of your company. It's a choice of you, whether you want to go in for what tools you would want to use amongst the available ones. The most expensive stage that looks at and which would require a lot of budget would be prototyping. But design thinking also gives you different ways of doing it. Like I said, a Lego could also be a prototype. A PPT could also be a prototype. A poster could be a prototype or just a newspaper, right? So that's the second. We've also spoken about culture. So the change is required, and this change is huge, and it's coming faster. We have a lot of Indian companies that are now focusing on customer experience and focusing on employee experience. Look for a couple of examples that I can tell you right now is look at Airtel. Yeah. Look at the motto that Airtel has. Exponential experience itself is the motto that they do. So from a company that only provided the call facility and internet facility now has a platform which has Disney Hotstar on it. You can pay your bills, utility bills. You can recharge your fast track. They've gotten the small payment banks also come on Airtel. So they're expanding. They're providing everything to you on one platform. Okay. So that's the power of design thinking.
Wow. So that was the last question from our audience. And I'm sure after this session, participants will have a cognizance on design thinking. So on behalf of the organizers, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being a part of this session. I would also like to thank Dr. R. Nandgopal sir, who is the president of AIMS, Dr. G.K. Shurude sir, Regional Vice President West, AIMS, and AIMS Secretariat, and lastly, my participants. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, same to you, ma'am.